I will talk about artificial intelligence in pharma and clinical trials, more give a broad overview of what's happening in the field. But before doing that, although Dr. Jeff already gave an introduction, I will tell a little bit about my background. Also disclosure, I'm actively engaged with some of the companies that I will mention during my presentation that are involved in digital health and such. Like I said, a little bit about me. I am Dutch, as you can see on the left, the country from windmills, tulips, and wooden shoes, although not much worn anymore. I have a background in biotechnology and molecular biology, then did a postdoc in neuroscience at Harvard Medical School, working on Parkinson's research mostly, and then continued in industry a little over 10 years ago as consultant. I was at RXI Pharmaceuticals to lead a project on therapeutics, RNAi therapeutics for ALS. I was a management consultant at PA Consulting. Then I continued as technology, innovation, strategy leader within Takeda Pharmaceuticals. And recently I joined SmartLabs as Director of Business Development. So SmartLabs, as Jeff already said, is accelerating scientific discovery by providing fast, flexible, and cost-effective lab space. And we're really targeting like the large pharma that, as I know from experience, has always lots of things that they have on the shelf, but they do not always have the resources, the space to really work on it. And so SmartLabs is really trying to fill this need. And right now we have locations in Boston and San Francisco, but we're starting also in Taiwan, and we hope to have more locations in the coming years. So I'm also having a small company on the side, BioFrontline, and I'm managing several LinkedIn groups that you see here shown. So artificial intelligence, Golden Triangle Biotech, Boston Biotech, small molecules, with an audience of a little over 10,000 people. And that's where I keep informed by everything that's happening in the life sciences. And occasionally when I have something interesting to tell, I also share it there. So about the presentation, I will first start with AI in clinical trials, the patient's perspective. The patient's obviously always the center of what we do. And so I will talk a little bit about that. Then I will also discuss a little bit about the impact of COVID-19, especially on cancer clinical trials. And then we'll continue with part two, really talking about how artificial intelligence will transform clinical trials and also how AI is being implemented in the pharmaceutical industry. I will show a little bit about the different places where AI is being adopted, implemented. We'll talk about some of the challenges of the use of AI, and then I will end with a little look towards the future, what might happen in the future and what is beyond the horizon. So to start with the first part, clinical trials, patient's perspective. So I happen to know somebody who went through a cancer clinical trial, and I've spoken with several people like her to also get their perspective of what they think about clinical trials and how they see AI being adopted and how it might improve their experience of the clinical trials. So my friend Karen Sobol was diagnosed with Waldenström's macroglobulinemia in 2005 and did not really know what to do, as many people that get diagnosed with such a disease. In the end, she found a clinical trial at the Bing Center, Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and she enrolled and she went through that clinical trial that took 12 weeks. She wrote a book about that, 12 weeks, and I can highly recommend it for anybody working in this field. It's giving some really very important insights about how a patient is experiencing this whole procedure. When talking with her about, well, what do you think of artificial intelligence and how that could have helped you or not, she was saying some of the following things. So one of the things, it might have been helpful to find specialists, because for many people that enter this stage, they do not know where to go. The number of places that are working on cancer, the number of doctors that are involved with this kind of research is enormous. And for somebody who has not been in this field, even for somebody in the field, it's very difficult to pinpoint where to go and who to talk to. So AI could have been helpful in finding the right specialist to quickly identify the right action to take. Could also have advice on the best course, and that's also something you see now being implemented, that artificial intelligence is more and more getting involved in providing information about the best course of action during the therapies. What she was also saying, which I found very interesting, that AI might also have provided too much info. And what she meant with that was especially that in her situation, the chances of her surviving the clinical trial were very, very small. And with that knowledge, if the knowledge would have been provided to her beforehand, which AI for sure could have done, then that might have led to her giving up all hope and going into the clinical trial in a completely different mindset than what she did now. And so I think that's something we all need to be very careful about, that artificial intelligence can provide a lot of information, but how you use that information, with who you share that information, whether or not you include the patient in discussing that information, is very important to consider. And that's also bringing me to the last point, no substitute for human interaction. Unfortunately, many people that are not in the field see AI as a kind of like a robot and robotic kind of tools on the bedside. And so that's of course something that we need to work on, to also educate people that artificial intelligence is not equivalent to robots. Because when you talk about AI, still patients get alarmed, and I think it's very important that we keep this human touch to everything we do with the patients. Some important questions to ask in that respect, and what will help with also having the population and people that are not as well informed as the experts, to get them on board. The two questions: will AI help to prevent people from becoming a patient? And will AI help patients to get better faster? If we can answer those two questions with yes, then obviously patients' perception of artificial intelligence and the use of artificial intelligence in clinical trials in hospitals will change for the better. And I think that's something we all need to work towards. So then a little bit about the effect of COVID-19 on clinical trials. And there's a very interesting paper that was published in June this year about specifically the effect of COVID-19 on cancer clinical trials. Cancer clinical trials are obviously one of the major group of clinical trials, and so it gives a very good indication of what was happening in the world after COVID-19 emerged and led to a lot of lockdowns and a lot of people also being scared to go to the hospital or to other settings where they would need to interact with doctors. Overall, we can see that over 80% of the clinical trials in the US and the EU were negatively affected. You see that in Asia, that number is a little bit less, and that obviously has to do with the fact that they got a better handle on the situation and were able to control the outbreak to an extent that we have not seen, unfortunately, in Europe and the US. Another thing that we see also as an effect of COVID-19 on clinical trials is that especially in clinical trials where a patient had to visit, obviously, the hospitals or the doctors because of the route of administration, for example, injections or other ways that needed the patients to see a healthcare professional, there especially we saw decreased enrollment. And that's also why we now see that investigators are really adopting or planning to adopt technologies that can reduce on-site monitoring and in-person patient visits. And then you can think of things like telemedicine, remote EMR, access for monitors, virtual monitoring, and all things that basically create this barrier between patients and the healthcare providers so that patients can just stay in the comfort of their homes. And I can highly recommend this Nature review of June. Another review also of Nature that I can highly recommend is from about 2 years ago, February 2019, that discusses wearable biosensors for healthcare monitoring. And what we see in parallel with COVID-19 stimulating adoption of technologies and embracing of novel tools like artificial intelligence, digital health, we see also that already over the last couple of years, patient acceptance and adoption of digital health and artificial intelligence are growing. So we see many people, many more people now than say 5 or 10 years ago, that are wearing watches, wear patches with sensors, use ingestibles, use smartphone apps for their health. And so that, of course, also generates an environment where we can really use these kind of technologies to do our work in a much better way, because we have much more data to work with. So how will AI then transform clinical trials, and how will it be implemented in the pharmaceutical industry? So what we especially see with the enormous amounts of data that are being collected is that we can really work to a much more personal approach. So genomics, biotechnology, wearable sensors, and artificial intelligence make it that patients really become the point of care. They're really the center of everything that's going on. Like I said, we create vast amounts of data, and we also are creating novel methods to do advanced analytics on this data. And that means that we can really start to do personalized and precision medicine based on everything we know about the patient. So from curing people with a one-size-fits-all approach, we're really going to a much more tailored individual approach. And another shift that you see is that instead of curing patients, we are seeing developments where the technologies are helping us to prevent people from becoming patients, because they get reminders of eating healthy, they get reminders of when to take the medication, so that they don't, they have a better adherence, and so the chance that they end up in hospital becomes just smaller. Another field where we see a huge uptake of AI is in monitoring patients, diagnostics. We have like the field of image analysis, voice analysis, keystroke analysis, EEG analysis, breathing, heart rate, movement. All these fields were already measured before, but now with the help of artificial intelligence, we are able to pick up signals that otherwise might have disappeared in the noise. Some examples of that, and I show here an example of IBM Watson and one of Google DeepMind. Google DeepMind worked together with the Moorfield Eye Hospital, and they provided the Moorfield Eye Hospital with Moorfield Eye Hospital provided Google's DeepMind with about 1 million optical coherent tomography scans, and used that then to train their algorithms to spot the early signs of age-related macular degeneration. Last May, DeepMind basically said that they could do the work better than the world's experts. And so this is a development that you see in more of these kind of technologies, that once the AI gets the right data, once the AI gets the right numbers to work with, the algorithms can self-learn, can improve themselves, and can quickly become much and much better in what they do. Another example is IBM Watson, where a team in Tokyo was trying to diagnose a woman with some kind of leukemia, but they couldn't really identify what it was. Spent several weeks on that, then engaged with IBM Watson. IBM Watson in less than 10 minutes went through 20 million cancer research papers and was able to tell exactly what the woman had, and also to prescribe the best course of action, so the treatment. And that is today. This technology will really develop in the next couple of years, and I foresee a future where with the right amount of data and with the right information, doctors can just push a button and the recipe and the diagnosis will roll out of the machine. And we can really use the data that we have available on the web from different geographies, from different eras, to really very quickly make the right connections and give the right diagnosis. So those are developments that are going very quick, and this is at the moment, I would say, in its infancy, but I think we can quickly see huge developments there. So another field related to health and to AI, behavioral modification. It may not come as a surprise to you that less than 3% of Americans live a healthy lifestyle. That was a Mayo Clinic proceedings paper in 2016. And we also all know that people do much better when they have a coach or somebody who tells them how to change their behavior to lead a better life, lead a more healthier life. Not everybody can afford a coach, a personal coach. But nowadays we all have a smartphone, and what we can do is install an app that helps us with living a more healthy, better life. And some of the companies working in this sector are ID Avatars, MedResponse, and there's a whole range more that also use AI in the background to learn about the person that is using this technology, and then come up with a bespoke program that helps these people to live a better and more healthy life. Another area that is quickly growing is the adherence industry, where companies are really working on increasing adherence. And just to give you an idea how important that is, about 24% of the prescriptions that are given are never filled. This leads then subsequently to about 20% of the hospitalizations, about 125,000 people dying each year in the US alone, and a cost for the healthcare system of over 100 billion. So it's a huge industry, it's a huge financial loss, and if we can improve that only a little bit, it would already be a fantastic result. Reasons for non-adherence: people don't understand their medication, they're against medication, they forget their medication, can't afford it, don't realize the importance. For many of these factors, you can use artificial intelligence to help people to, for example, remember, or to educate them about the importance of taking the medication. And several companies have picked this up, and here are some examples. Next IT Healthcare serves thousands of patients that are suffering from MS, and helps them by educating them, motivating them, sharing data, and making really like a personal approach to the patient to help them to stay on the medication. AI Cure is another one that worked together with AbbVie, for example, and in a 6-month schizophrenia study, they saw that they could increase the adherence from 61% to over 89%. And that's a huge, huge benefit. So a lot of the clinical trials also fail because of adherence problems. And obviously, if you add something like this to a clinical trial, that can be just the one thing that makes or breaks the clinical trial. Another example is WISA. WISA is a chat box focused on building mental resilience. And it showed that in one study, people that chatted with WISA showed a significant increase in adherence and a 45% reduction in depression. May this year, Aetna International partnered with WISA in its efforts to address the mental well-being crisis as a result of COVID-19. And so you see that these kind of programs that have AI running in the background become increasingly important and really also get adopted by large parts of the population. Another area where AI is, of course, being very, very important is data mining, electronic health records. And I'm not going to read this all to you, but just to summarize, advances in natural language processing. So really in the ability of algorithms to recognize text and make also sense of the text, the context. Enormous advances in natural language processing over the last couple of years, and that has helped enormously with making AI able to understand, for example, electronic health records and a lot of data that is available about patients. That being said, AI is also being added to EHR platforms, so electronic health record platforms, and that means that the future EHRs They are not only containing some data, but they have information about population health, they have telemedicine, voice interaction, they help with clinical decision making, they can predict adverse events, they can give advice on people's behavior, what they should eat. And so there's a whole range of things that are being added to the EHRs that change the way we use EHRs. Some other examples of companies that are using electronic health records and natural language processing combination. Again, I'm not going to read all of these. This is just a small selection of many of the companies that are working in this field. But you see from some of the news lines that I showed there, and the fields that these companies are working in, it's all over the place, and they are very active, and they are regularly in the news with either partnerships that they are doing with big healthcare organizations or with breakthroughs that they have. So absolutely a very fast evolving, developing world that we will hear much more from in the near future. AI is also being used in clinical trial management, study design, and some examples are listed here. GNS Healthcare, for example, is answering questions about how people will respond to certain medications and what would happen if one intervention was chosen over another. So that helps really the doctors also with the decision process and with the way the therapy is being designed, and how if one therapy is not successful, quickly the patient can be taken to another therapy. Trials AI similarly helps to improve trial protocols, design and execution. And Bioclinica is another example that manages everything from the initial protocol to post-approval. Recruitment for clinical trials is another big thing where AI is playing an ever bigger role. Quantum Black, for example, was partnering with with Novartis. Quantum Black originated at McKinsey. And in pilot trials, it delivered 10 to 15% reduction in patient enrollment times. IBM Watson for trial with the Mayo Clinic's breast cancer clinical trials was able to increase enrollment significantly, and you saw an 80% of increase there using also IBM Watson for clinical trial matching. Another company that is working in this field is Deep6 AI, and they have as their slogan, find patients in minutes, not months. And from some of the things I've heard, it might not be minutes, but definitely much, much faster than doing it in the old ways. The last sector that I want to quickly mention is remote monitoring of patients. We already saw some of the technologies that are being used, all the wearables, and there's a whole selection of companies that are working in this field. I'm not going to name them all, but Massimo, Vitals, Connexa Health, Medtronic, GE Healthcare, all of them have their platforms, and all of them have their sometimes own wearables. Sometimes they work together with other companies that provide the wearables, and have then a bespoke system measuring the patient depending on the kind of condition that they want to measure. Blood pressure, heart rate, blood oxygen, respiration rate, the last two, of course, very important now with COVID-19. So you see also some of these companies that were really like, for example, Current Health, very prominent in the field of blood oxygen and respiration rate measurement, and so also very prominent in working together with some of the big pharma in the clinical trials in the COVID-19 space. So then a little bit about artificial intelligence across the pharma value chain, and that's more of a summary because I have already highlighted some of the fields where artificial intelligence becomes very important. We see basically in the pharma world that almost everywhere, preclinical, clinical, post-market, everywhere AI is being implemented. At some areas more so than at others. Drug development, target identification is an area where we see a lot happening. Candidate selection is another one, but also, for example, formulation development. There's some companies that are working in that area, and all these points here that I mentioned, all these topics, basically see AI being implemented. And then specifically, if you look at the clinical trial space, study design, patient matching, stratification, enrollment, monitoring, and adherence are some of the major areas where AI is being more and more used to perfect and make these processes more efficient. So then about some of the challenges of artificial intelligence and its use. And I'm not telling anything new here, but it's always good to remind people of that. The right data science team is very important. You work with lots of different people, biologists, scientists in chemistry, people that are running clinical trials. You need to have IT professionals on board. And so to find the right team and to have also the different members of the team talking with each other and understanding each other can sometimes be a challenge. That's one of the challenges. Another big challenge is that the data is coming from a variety of sources. You can think of all the different variables that are around. You can also think of the different geographies that you work with, historical records, today's records, very different. So with all that data, and I show there lots of different foods can make a very nice meal, but if you put lots of data together and you give it to your algorithm, it might not be as digestible as you would assume. So that's a major difficulty, and a lot of the data needs to be transformed into the right package so that the AI can handle it. Related to that is also that a lot of the data is not clean. So it needs to be cleaned up, and that sometimes takes a lot of manual labor to make sure that the data that goes into the algorithms is indeed also clean enough for the AI algorithms to work with. Other things that are challenges, hype, skepticism. I think with the COVID-19, the silver lining is that there's more acceptance for things like AI and digital health. But still, there has been a lot of hype, there have been a lot of headlines, there have been a lot of promises in the past that did not live up to the expectations. And that is, of course, a problem because that puts the whole field in kind of a bad position. And I think also for all of us, we should not overpromise, we should not tell people things that are not going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. So really trying to make the expectations realistic, and with that we can also get more people on board. Another topic that I'm not going to talk much about, but privacy, security, obviously a huge thing when you have huge amounts of data of patients going across the digital highway. Obviously that all needs to be handled very carefully, and you could fill a whole day about all the issues that could arise from that, but I'm not going into that. I want to discuss a few more challenges. Validation, regulatory, difficult for the organizations like FDA, NICE, and others in the world that are doing the regulation of the digital tools, digital apps, digital technology that is coming out. To give you an example, and that was in a paper in 2017, there were already over 300,000 healthcare apps. That number has grown exponentially, so it must be way more today. But it shows how many of those apps are around, and that's only the apps, so we're not even talking about all the devices and other things that are around. But it's impossible for the healthcare regulators to keep an eye on all those different things that come out on a daily basis. And so validation, are those apps safe? That is something that also the makers at the moment need to really, Jeffrey was just talking about ethics. There was, for example, the example of MoleApp that was detecting skin cancer, but then had some false negatives. And obviously when you send people that message that everything is okay, and in the end it doesn't turn out not to be okay, that's a very bad thing. So those things should not happen. Unfortunately, some of those things happened. Those apps that I know of were taken off the market. But it's very difficult for regulators to keep an eye on everything because there's so much going on in this field. Bias, so equality, very simple thing like difference between men and women. There's already a lot of bias, but also you can think of different races, white, black, Asians. There's a lot of bias in the world, and it can easily become part of the algorithms that are being built, and we need to be very careful to make sure that the algorithms will be objective. And yeah, that's being worked on, but it's not always easy because the people that work on it unintentionally very often introduce biases, and yeah, that's definitely a problem. And then wrong conclusions. I always give the example of like the relationship between eating ice cream and being eaten by a shark. There seems to be a very clear relationship between those two. Obviously, that relation is not there. What I want to say with that is that if you look into huge amounts of data and use artificial intelligence to go through all that data to find relationships, you will find relationships. And sometimes those relationships look very clear and very, yeah, well thought of. But the relationships might not be true. And so we need to think also about ways how we can validate that those relationships are really existing and that we are really looking at some true relationships, or whether it's just some inference from other factors that we did not see because we are not looking, but the AI is looking. With that, I want to almost conclude my presentation. So a little look beyond the horizon. We all have seen that AI is capable to do some amazing things. We have now artificial intelligence that is composing symphonies. We have artificial intelligence that is driving cars. We are talking with our laptops, PCs, phones, with Siri, Alexa, Sophia. Sophia is something interesting. If you've never seen it, it's like very well developed chat box. You can find some YouTube videos on Sophia, and she has also 60 facial expressions. And when you see her talking, and she even gave interviews with some journalists, it's yeah, almost scary to see how realistic and yeah, what they were able to do. So that also is in its infancy. Very early in the presentation, we were talking about the human factor being very important, humans at the bedside. But I would not be surprised to see some form of Sophia in the future also being part of the healthcare system, maybe as a nurse, maybe as a practitioner. We need to see, but the developments are really pretty amazing. We also see that the amount of data becomes quite enormous. By 2025, an estimate is that we have about 163 zettabytes of data. You see that's equivalent to about watching the Netflix catalog close to 500 million times, 40 trillion DVDs. So you get the idea. There's a huge amount of data. And what are we going to do with that and what can we do with that? And how can AI help with going through that data and make sense of it and make use of it? And then we have another thing on the horizon, which is quantum computing. Goldman Sachs put it very nicely in 2018, solving problems in minutes, not millennia. And when you think of it, in I think it's 2017 or so, Google came out with Bristlecone, and that computer they claimed was 100 million times faster than the general laptop. That would mean that in one day that computer could do about the same amount of calculations as your laptop in, I believe it was something like 250,000 years. So that's an enormous speed. These computers now today are not very useful yet because the technology that it takes to keep these computers up and running has not been developed yet. And there's a lot of things about quantum computing where you have like interference with the environment, which makes keeping a quantum computer up and running very difficult. But eventually we might get there. And then in the pharma industry, you could think of simulations, models that we cannot not even like envision, because the power would be so amazing that it's very difficult to see what exactly we could do. But it might be that we could just have like virtual human patients that we could use to predict how a therapy would be effective or not effective. We could use it for drug development. We could use it for many other things. And we could get very sophisticated virtual clinical trials where no human beings would be part of those clinical trials, because everything can be done in silico. And that this is not just something that will happen maybe in 20 years from now. Is also when you take a look at the amount of government that become available. The UK government last year unlocked £153 million for quantum computing. Zapata Computing joins Quantum Industry Canada as a founding member, and that industry association will accelerate the commercialization of Canadian quantum innovation, and they estimate that to be a $142.4 billion opportunity for Canada alone. And that's not only healthcare or life sciences, that's many more things, but it shows the opportunity there. Recently, D-Wave, and that's just like 2 weeks ago, quantum computing meets cloud computing. D-Wave says that it has its 5,000 qubit system online for business. And also the House bill recently proposed to also free up millions to build US quantum network infrastructure. And so with that, I would like to end my presentation. I thank you all very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, you can find me either here or also on LinkedIn, and happy to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ronald. And there was a question from you from an attendee. Person is asking, which job role in pharma do you think AI replacements are good in the future?
I think all the roles that involve a lot of going through data, so the intelligence kind of roles, also maybe from a legal perspective. So we have not really spoken about that, but you see also like how a pharma company runs the risk to run into legal difficulties with certain medications, for example. Nowadays, artificial intelligence is being used to make those kind of predictions, to also take a look how, what their freedom to operate is when they are working on certain molecules, certain biologics. And so in that field, I still see humans being involved, but I think less so, because a lot of that research will be done by artificial intelligence system. And I think for each system where data is really one of the main things that are being used to do that kind of work, artificial intelligence will replace some of the people that are doing that kind of work now. Thank you.